over the years, I've developed a number of games, starting back in 2017 with Planet X2 for the Commodore 64. The next year, in 2018, I did Planet X3 for MS-DOS. And then in 2020, I released the first Petsky Robots game for the PET, which later turned into a porting frenzy and now exists on 26 unique platforms. But I've also written some lesser well-known games on the Commander X16 platform, such as Planet X16, the most complex real-time strategy game ever made on an 8-bit platform. And I also wrote Tetrads, which is a Tetris clone on the X16. And lastly, I ported a game called Zixit from the MS-DOS world over to the X16. Although I later rebranded the game to Quarx and changed all the graphics assets just to make sure that Optic Software didn't rise from the dead somewhere and sue me for trademark infringement. Now, it is this game that will be the focus of this video. You see, I've been thinking about doing a new game for the VIC-20 or the C64 for quite a while. The trouble is finding the right game idea. For example, I don't want to do another platform game for the C64. I mean, those have been done to death. And it seems like every week there's a new platform game coming out for the C64. So I wanted to try something new, something that hadn't been done before, and that's when I got the idea to do Quarx. Now, granted, the C64 already had a number of similar type games, such as Sue Sweet, which is pretty much the same game mechanic. And then there's Orbits, which isn't exactly the same game, but is a pretty similar concept. And then there's Pillars, which came out just a few years ago, which is also the same game mechanic. But for some reason, none of these have the same energy as Quarx. However, I was only able to find one game on the VIC-20 that had a similar game mechanic, and that was Vic Column. Now, this came out 20 years ago. And admittedly, the music is fantastic on this game, but I wasn't overall impressed with the rest of it. So I decided to move forward with my port. Now, the first part of the game development, at least for me, always looks like this. And this. And this. Basically, I spend days or sometimes weeks thinking about how to best pull it off with a given architecture. Now, as with any VIC-20 game, I had to immediately decide between two options. Since there are no hardware sprites, the only way to move an object smoothly on the screen is by having the sprites be monochrome, and they can't overlap with any background object, unless that object is also monochrome. And as you can see with the original game, the blocks fall in a nice pixel-smooth fashion. So I had to decide between shapes that looked like this, but could move smoothly on the screen, or color shapes that had to move 8 pixels at a time to stay within the color cell boundaries. Well, I decided color was very important for this type of game, so I decided to go that route. I had also considered a hybrid approach, where these shapes were monochrome while moving, and then they would turn color when they landed in the grid. Ultimately, I decided it was easier for the eye to match the shapes if the falling blocks were also look the same as the ones on the grid below. On the bright side, the shapes are 16 pixels square, which means there are 4 color cells per shape, so at least I can move the shapes to a halfway point, which can offer a little smoother appearance. Another happy coincidence is that the game uses 6 different shapes, and the VIC-20 has 8 foreground colors, but 2 of those are black and white, so there are only 6 colors that have any hue to them, so that works out just perfect. Now, speaking of shapes, I drew the initial shapes myself using PaintShop Pro, trying to match the concept of the X16 version, which obviously had more color available, and I needed to make these monochrome, and what I made didn't look bad, but I sent these over to Piotr, my pixel artist, and I asked him to improve them, and he certainly did. Likewise, I had drawn this intro screen myself. Again, it didn't look bad, but I sent this over as well, and it came back looking like this, which I couldn't complain. The next challenge was a lot harder. I needed to decide how to create a colorful background behind the playfield. In the original Zixit game, it was done with plasma effects that were calculated on the fly. On the X16 version, I decided to go with palette cycling trick to get pretty good approximation. Plus, I was able to do other effects as the levels progressed. Well, my first idea for the VIC-20 was to go with raster effects. Now, I'd seen this demo and thought, hey, perhaps if I could create a raster effect and limit it to just the center of the screen, or the playfield area, then that would be a great effect, and I could have it animate, or change colors or designs for each level. However, my early attempts at creating a stable raster in the center of the screen were a failure. And even this, as unstable as it was chewing up like 90% of the CPU resources for the system. And what's worse is after I started creating some mock-ups, I realized the VIC-20 just didn't have enough color variations to pull this off without impacting the playability of the game. For example, if I make the background red, it makes it harder to see the red pieces. After more thinking, I finally came up with a solution I thought might work. And ultimately, I had an epiphany. I could use the same color cycling trick I used for the X16 version, except the VIC-20 doesn't have a palette that you could modify or cycle, so here's the catch. I knew the playfield, or at least the part I wanted to animate, was going to be 10 by 23 characters in size. So I drew some patterns in PaintShop Pro using a 16 grayscale pattern. Now these are some of the first patterns I created, and then the idea was that for every shade of gray, I would assign a dither pattern character to it. Now this was the initial character layout, although as you'll see shortly, I made it so that each level could have its own character layout, and that allowed me to do some pretty cool effects. In fact, I was even able to do a warp speed style starfield, something similar to the Matrix, and even light rain. And I designed the character set so that all of the playfield shapes start at character 128. So the animation routine checks each character cell before updating it, and if it's above 128, then it skips it, thus making anything in the upper half of the character set given a screen priority. So I was fairly pleased with this animation system. The next job was to create actual gameplay on top of that. It took a few days, and I was able to reuse some of the code from the Commander X16 version to help with pattern matching and things like that, but it was really starting to come together. Had been using the VIC-20 up at the Time Rift Arcade to test the game because, well, that's where my VIC-20 is set up already. I even let a few customers and a few fans that dropped in beta test the game for me on real hardware. So I got a lot of feedback, mostly positive. The last thing I needed was a really kickin' soundtrack. Now, this proved to be one of the more daunting tasks. My first thought was to use VIC Tracker. It's really the only well-known tracker program for the VIC-20. However, I saw a few problems. Problem number one is it wasn't designed to handle sound effects over the top of the music. Problem number two was that it didn't include a plugin module for your game, rather you need to integrate it into your source code, and top it off, it was written in a different syntax than the compiler I used. So it'd be a massive pain to get it working, and I couldn't make heads or tails of the source anyway. After much more thinking, I concluded I could probably write my own tracker faster than trying to adapt VIC Tracker. However, things took an interesting turn when Noelle, the person I hired to create the music for me, discovered that Furnace Tracker has a built-in VIC-20 setting. So she was able to create music and hear exactly how it would sound on the VIC-20. And then she also mentioned that it could spit out a text file with all the different patterns and notes and everything. And my first plan was to transcode this all by hand, but then I reached out to another friend of mine, Troy Ablin, who is a wizard with Python, and he wrote a program that would translate the text file over to my exact format my playback routine needed. So this is how the music data looks in the source code now, and well, here we go. So the title screen alternates between this and the credit screen. I'm hoping to add a self-play attract mode to it here shortly. That's one of the little things I still have to finish up. You can select different block sets here. There's really no difference between these in terms of gameplay other than just whatever you like best. And you can pick between 3 difficulty levels. And so, this is the actual gameplay. It's a standard match 3 type game. You can match horizontally, vertically, or diagonal. And if you're lucky, you might even get a chain reaction going like this. Now once you reach 40 matched blocks, it will transition to the next level. And with that, the animation changes and the speed increases slightly. Also, every 2 level changes, the music will change as well. And of course, when you inevitably lose, this happens. And so there you have it. That's Quarx for the VIC-20. So I imagine you got probably at least 2 questions you're going to ask. Question number 1 is probably, when can you buy it? And the answer is not right now. Couple of things. I still need to finish a little bit of code on it, but second of all, I'm getting it put on a cartridge. So Kevin at Texelec is working right now on a cartridge design for me. And I think that's going to work out better because otherwise you're going to need a RAM expander and a disk drive to play this game. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if it was just on a cartridge? You could just plug it in, No need for a RAM expander or disk drive. Of course, it'll still be available as a digital download for those who want to use it in emulators and whatnot. But anyway, so that's going to be a few weeks, maybe a few months before the cartridge is done. So I will obviously give you an update on that eventually. The second thing is, you're probably going to ask, am I going to port it to other systems? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So this is a possible title screen for the PET version of the game. And here's a mock-up I did of how the gameplay might look. I think it will look a lot better when properly animated, but I'm weeks away from having anything functional I can show you beyond that. As for the C64 version, here's a possible title screen for that. However, much like the PET, I'm still very much in the planning stage for the C64 because I have to decide a number of fundamental issues, such as, does this game run in high-res or multicolor mode? Does it run in character mode or bitmap mode? Each of these have massive trade-offs, and it may just require experimentation to decide. I've also been exploring making the shapes a bit larger on the C64 since we have more screen resolution, which gives them a bit more detail. As you can see, we've been experimenting with different options here, and while you may look at this and think the multicolor looks best, and I would agree, the problem is, for it to look that nice, I need to be in bitmap mode, and I'm honestly not sure if the game would run fast enough like that, especially when it comes to animating the background. But then again, on the C64, we have sprites to work with, so the falling blocks could be sprites. Or we could go the other way around. Maybe we could put sprites in the background of the playfield and use those to animate. But that requires massive amounts of new code to be written. That being said, all of these graphical options look better than their VIC-20 counterparts. You might be thinking they would look exactly like the C64's monochrome character mode, but even that looks better, simply because the C64 has more palette options to choose from, and thus we can add some flair to the shapes just by coloring some of the 4 cells differently. Otherwise, they're still monochrome, though. Another consideration is that bitmap mode will also let us have cool backgrounds outside of the playfield, like these. But again, I'm just not sure yet how to handle the animation effects if using bitmap mode. So long story short, I don't as yet know how I want to do it. It's going to require some experimentation to see what's feasible before coming into any particular path. Interestingly enough, all 3 of the games I showed earlier are using multicolor mode instead of high res. But I'm pretty sure Pillars is using multicolor character mode, which is why you see less color in everything. Orbits, on the other hand, is definitely using bitmap mode with the sprites to help the falling pieces. And I believe Sue Sweet is doing the same thing, but none of these games have an animated background, so there's that. Anyway, while you are waiting for updates on this, you can always play the beta version on my personal VIC-20 at the Time Rift Arcade if you happen to be in town. And for you VIC-20 fans, I have another consolation prize for you. A couple of months ago, I did a massive update to the VIC-20 version of Petsky Robots, adding a number of new features, including an on-screen map. And best of all, you can download the entire game for free on my website in the shareware section. And I'll give you a little more taste of Quarx here, but that's all for this episode. As always, thanks for watching.